What does it mean when a country battling insecurity and economic pressure decides to spend $5 million not on new weapons, but on medicine for its people? Beginning on March 1st, 2026, the government of Burkina Faso will implement a sweeping reduction in the prices of essential generic medicines, health products, and medical consumables. Some items will see price cuts of up to 72%. The total financial impact is estimated at 3 billion CFA francs, approximately 5 million United States dollars, and that entire amount will be covered by the state rather than by ordinary households. On the surface, this looks like a straightforward public health reform. Lower prices mean greater access. Greater access means fewer families forced to choose between buying food and paying for treatment. But in a country navigating political transition, armed threats, and economic strain, every major financial decision carries strategic weight. Burkina Faso is not operating in a vacuum. It faces persistent security challenges, limited fiscal space, and intense international scrutiny. In such an environment, allocating billions of CFA to reduce medicine prices is not just a technical adjustment. It is a declaration of priorities. It signals what the government believes the role of the state should be. Under Captain Ibrahim Traore, the leadership has repeatedly emphasized sovereignty, national dignity, and a shift toward policies that directly benefit ordinary citizens. By absorbing the cost of these reductions, the state is positioning itself as a protector of household stability. The message is clear: essential medicine is not a luxury. It is a basic right. But here is the deeper question. Is this bold move simply a short-term relief measure, or is it part of a broader strategy to redefine state power and political legitimacy in the Sahel in the next sections? We will break down the structure of Burkina Faso's health system, examine the real meaning of 3 billion CFA in a constrained budget, identify who benefits the most, explore the risks, and analyze what this decision reveals about the evolving leadership of Ibrahim Traore. To understand why this decision matters, we need to look at the structure of Burkina Faso's health system before these price cuts were announced. Burkina Faso is classified as a low-income country, and its public health infrastructure has long operated under financial constraints. Government health spending per person remains modest compared to global averages. In practical terms, this means that many facilities depend heavily on essential generic medicines to treat common conditions such as infections, hypertension, diabetes, and malaria. These generic drugs form the backbone of primary care across the country. However, a large share of health costs is still paid directly by households, in rural areas especially. Families often cover consultations, medicines, and basic consumables out of pocket. When prices rise or incomes fall, treatment is frequently delayed or reduced. For older adults living on limited income and for families managing chronic illness, the monthly cost of medicine can quietly become one of the heaviest burdens in the household budget. Burkina Faso also relies significantly on imported pharmaceutical products. That reliance exposes the system to currency fluctuations, supply chain disruptions, and transport costs. When global prices increase or logistics are disrupted by insecurity, the impact is felt quickly at the pharmacy counter. In recent years, the country has faced additional pressure from internal displacement and insecurity in certain regions. Health centers in affected areas have struggled with staffing, supply continuity, and patient access. In such an environment, affordability becomes even more critical. A medicine that is technically available but financially out of reach might as well not exist for many citizens. This is why reducing prices by up to 72% is not a minor administrative change. It strikes at a structural vulnerability within the system. It directly addresses the gap between availability and affordability. For many households, this decision could mean the difference between consistent treatment and interrupted care. And in public health terms, that difference can determine whether a manageable condition becomes a life-threatening crisis. 3 billion CFA francs may not sound dramatic in global financial terms. Converted, it represents roughly 5 million United States dollars. For a wealthy nation, that amount might be absorbed quietly within a large public health budget. But for Burkina Faso, a country managing security operations, economic constraints, and development needs simultaneously, this allocation carries weight. Public finances in Burkina Faso are under constant pressure. Resources must cover defense spending, infrastructure, civil service salaries, education, and humanitarian responses to internal displacement. In that context, choosing to absorb 3 billion CFA in medicine subsidies is not a neutral decision. It reflects a clear prioritization. By covering this cost directly, the state is effectively transferring purchasing power back to households, instead of families spending that money on essential medicines. They retain it for food, school fees, transport, or other daily needs. In macroeconomic terms, this acts as a small but meaningful redistribution measure. In political terms, it sends a powerful message the government is willing to shoulder the burden. The boldness of the move lies not only in the amount, but in the signal it sends. Governments often hesitate to reduce prices significantly for fear of widening deficits or creating unsustainable obligations. A 72% reduction on certain consumables is particularly striking. It demonstrates an interventionist approach, where the state actively shapes the affordability of essential goods. However, sustainability is the central question. A one-time adjustment is easier to manage than a permanent subsidy. If economic growth slows or revenue collection weakens, maintaining this level of support could become challenging. Policymakers will need careful budgeting, efficient procurement, and strong oversight to prevent leakage or misuse. Still, in strategic terms, the allocation of 3 billion CFA to medicine, rather than administrative expansion or symbolic projects, reshapes the narrative. It frames the government as responsive to immediate human needs. In environments marked by uncertainty, fiscal choices become declarations of intent. Here, the intent appears clear. Health security is being treated as a pillar of national stability. The immediate beneficiaries of this policy are easy to identify, but the depth of its impact deserves careful attention. First, older adults stand to gain significantly. In many low-income settings, elderly citizens live without formal pension systems or with limited family support. Chronic conditions such as hypertension, diabetes, and respiratory illnesses require consistent medication. When prices are high, adherence drops. A reduction of up to 67% on tablets or more than 50% on injectables can transform routine treatment from a financial strain into a manageable expense. Second, households managing chronic illness will feel relief. Consider a family spending the equivalent of $30 per month on essential medicines. If average reductions approach 50%, that household could retain $15 monthly. In a country where many live on modest incomes, that amount can cover staple food, school supplies, or transport to work. The psychological impact is also important. Predictable, affordable treatment reduces anxiety and uncertainty. Rural populations may benefit disproportionately. In remote areas, access to services is already constrained by distance and insecurity. When medicine prices are high, families may delay travel to clinics until conditions worsen. Lower prices reduce the barrier at the final step of the journey. Affordability can encourage earlier consultation and better health outcomes. Medical consumables, with reductions of up to 72%, are particularly relevant for maternal care. Wound treatment, and minor surgical procedures. These are not luxury items. They are everyday necessities in district hospitals and health centers. Beyond the financial aspect, there is a trust dimension. When citizens observe tangible relief in their daily expenses, confidence in public institutions can grow. Policy becomes visible not in speeches, but in receipts and pharmacy counters. In fragile contexts, small improvements can have outsized symbolic value. By targeting essential medicines, the government touches a universal concern, health. The true beneficiaries, therefore, are not only patients, but the broader relationship between state and society. No policy of this scale is without risk. A price reduction of up to 72% sounds decisive and compassionate, but its success depends entirely on execution. The first risk concerns supply stability. When prices are reduced significantly, distributors and suppliers must still find the arrangement financially viable. If reimbursement from the state is delayed, or procurement systems are inefficient, shortages can emerge. In fragile regions already affected by insecurity, even a short disruption in the supply chain can leave clinics without essential stock. Second, there is the question of long-term fiscal sustainability. 3 billion CFA francs, approximately 5 million United States dollars, may be manageable in the short term. But if the subsidy becomes permanent, it requires consistent revenue streams. Economic slowdowns, reduced exports, or unexpected security expenses could pressure the budget. If funding falters, authorities may face the difficult choice of reversing the policy or accumulating arrears. Third, implementation integrity is critical. Price reductions on paper must translate into lower costs at the pharmacy counter. Weak oversight can allow intermediaries to capture margins through informal markups. Transparent monitoring and accountability mechanisms are therefore essential. There is also a political dimension to risk. When a government announces bold relief measures, expectations rise quickly. If citizens encounter empty shelves or inconsistent pricing, disappointment can erode trust just as rapidly as it was built. In addition, suppliers may adjust behavior in subtle ways, prioritizing markets with higher returns or limiting distribution to remote areas where oversight is weaker. These unintended consequences can undermine the equity objectives of the reform. For the policy to succeed, procurement systems, distribution networks, and regulatory oversight must operate with precision. A 72% reduction is powerful, but only if medicine remains available. Ultimately, this decision is a calculated gamble. If managed well, it strengthens legitimacy. If mismanaged, it risks becoming a symbol of overreach. Execution will determine whether bold intent translates into durable impact. To fully understand the strategic dimension of this decision, we must examine the role of Captain Ibrahim Traore within this policy shift. Since taking power during a period of political instability, Traore has positioned himself as a leader focused on sovereignty and national dignity. Much of the international attention surrounding his leadership has centered on security operations and geopolitical realignment. However, long-term legitimacy cannot rest solely on military posture. It must translate into tangible improvements in daily life. Reducing the cost of essential medicines allows Traore to broaden his narrative. Instead of being seen only as a security-focused leader, he can present himself as a protector of social welfare. By absorbing 3 billion CFA francs, approximately 5 million United States dollars, the state projects an image of responsibility and care. This move also aligns with a broader political strategy common in transitional governments: consolidate internal support through visible social policies. When citizens directly experience financial relief, the connection between leadership and benefit becomes concrete. The reform does not require complex explanations. People see lower prices and feel the difference. There is also symbolic value. Essential medicine is universally understood as a necessity. By intervening in this sector, the government signals that it views health as foundational to national strength. A population that can afford treatment is more productive, more stable, and more resilient. At the same time, this strategy carries calculated risk. Leaders who centralize authority are often judged more strictly on performance outcomes. If medicine shortages occur or budget pressures intensify, critics may argue that resources were mismanaged. Nevertheless, the decision reinforces a particular image, a state that does not retreat from economic challenges but steps in decisively. In environments where trust in institutions is fragile, visible acts of protection can redefine political legitimacy. Through this policy, Traore is not only adjusting prices, he is shaping how power is perceived. While domestic reactions to the medicine subsidy have largely focused on affordability and relief, international observers may interpret the move through a different lens. Western governments and media outlets have often framed Burkina Faso's current leadership primarily in terms of political transition, security policy, and concerns about democratic governance. In that broader narrative, social spending decisions are rarely evaluated in isolation. Instead, they are viewed within the context of power consolidation and geopolitical alignment. Some critics may argue that generous subsidies can function as instruments of political consolidation, strengthening internal support while broader institutional questions remain unresolved. International human rights organizations and foreign policymakers have expressed concern in recent years about political centralization and restrictions in certain areas of public life. In that environment, even well-intentioned social policies may be scrutinized. Observers may ask whether economic relief measures are accompanied by institutional reforms that ensure transparency and accountability. There is also a geopolitical dimension. Burkina Faso has repositioned itself diplomatically in ways that diverge from traditional Western partnerships. When governments redefine external alliances, domestic policies can become part of a larger narrative about sovereignty and resistance to influence. A bold medicine subsidy may be interpreted as evidence of a leadership model that prioritizes internal legitimacy over external approval. However, it is important to distinguish between policy substance and political framing. Reducing the price of essential medicines directly benefits patients regardless of international debates. Yet, in global politics, perception shapes response. Financial institutions and foreign donors may assess fiscal sustainability carefully before extending support. For other African nations observing this case, a lesson emerges. When pursuing assertive domestic reforms, especially under transitional leadership, governments must anticipate scrutiny from multiple directions. Social protection measures can strengthen legitimacy at home, but they do not shield a country from diplomatic pressure. In the end, the reduction of medicine prices is both a health policy and a political signal. It demonstrates that governance choices in one sector inevitably resonate beyond national borders. Looking ahead, the long-term impact of this decision will depend on which path Burkina Faso ultimately follows. The reduction in medicine prices can open several possible futures, each shaped by execution, fiscal discipline, and broader political developments. In the most optimistic scenario, the subsidy is implemented smoothly. Medicines remain consistently available across urban and rural clinics. Procurement systems function efficiently, and oversight mechanisms prevent diversion or artificial markups. Households experience real, sustained savings. In this case, public trust grows steadily. The state is seen as capable not only of asserting sovereignty, but of delivering practical results. Health security becomes part of national resilience. A second scenario is more fragile. Prices are reduced, but supply chains struggle. Delays in reimbursement lead to stock shortages. Citizens hear about 72% reductions, yet encounter empty shelves. Expectations, once elevated, turn into frustration. In this outcome, the policy's symbolic strength weakens, and critics argue that ambition exceeded capacity. A third scenario revolves around fiscal pressure. Even if supply remains stable, sustained subsidies require consistent funding. If economic headwinds intensify, authorities may face difficult trade-offs between health support and other national priorities such as security or infrastructure. Maintaining credibility would require transparent communication and adaptive budgeting. For other African nations, the lesson is nuanced. Social protection policies can strengthen legitimacy, particularly during political transition. But bold announcements must be matched by administrative strength. Governance is tested not only by vision, but by detail. Ultimately, this decision forces a broader question. What is the role of the modern African state in times of uncertainty? Is it merely a regulator, or an active guardian of basic welfare in reducing the price of essential medicines? Burkina Faso signals that it chooses intervention over detachment. Whether this marks the beginning of a durable model of governance will depend on consistency, transparency, and results. You are not just watching a subsidy unfold, you are witnessing an experiment in how power, responsibility, and public trust are being redefined in the Sahel.